Welcome, everybody, to Mental Health Matters. This is Tom Duff, Executive Director of St. Louis Counseling. Check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. Make sure you spell out Saint when you're putting that in there, so stlouiscounseling.org. And this is Mental Health Matters. This is our podcast where we try to have open conversation about mental health, talk about the fact that mental health touches every aspect of society. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, mental health is involved. So, of course, our goal is to make mental health okay to talk around the dinner table at night. Hopefully people still sit around a dinner table, but we want it to be okay to talk about. And if you are, first and foremost, subscribe to our podcast, share our podcast, tell people about our podcast. The goal is to break down stigma and get the message out there. So feel free to do that. As always, we have on entertaining and interesting guests, sometimes gurus. I think we might have a guru today, whether she believes it or not. But our guest today is Michelle Schiller-Baker. Michelle, how are you?
I am fine, Michael. Thank you.
Michael, I'm Tom.
Oh, Michael, I'm thinking of Mike, me, and start over.
Yeah. No. This is good. I like this.
I am thinking of one of our colleagues, Michael, me, and while you were talking, and I am so
beautiful.
Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, he'll be on another time, okay?
Yes.
All right.
God
awesome.
almighty.
So Michelle is, as I said, she's kind of like a guru, all right? She's a guru when it comes to her expertise, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes for standing up for people in general. She spent 37 years now, just about 37, right?
Correct.
At a local shelter here in St. Louis, St. Martha's Hall. And we're excited to talk today. So what you're going to find, as you all know already, Michelle likes to have fun, so she's going to have some good conversation. But how are you?
I am fine. Thank you, Tom.
Good. Good. So, I wanted to have Michelle on for a couple different reasons. It was funny. I was listening to you speak. I don't know where we were a couple weeks ago. Oh, it was a board orientation and for Catholic Charities board members. And every time I hear you speak, I've never really shared this with you, but every time I hear you speak about protecting women, protecting children, I'm like, she just gets to the heart of it, So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, because we all try to bring expertise to our boards and everything. I'm like, I need to have Michelle come in and just talk to my board. And then I'm like, wait a minute. The podcast. Let's have Michelle come in and talk on the podcast. Then I can make the board members download it and listen to it. And that way we get more downloads, right? Well, so today I kind of wanted to talk about that, but I don't know where our conversation will go because a lot of times it goes different places, right? But maybe let's just start first with, let me ask you this. 37 years in working with women, protecting women, what has driven you to do this work? Now, I'm getting deep now, I know.
You are getting deep.
Yeah.
Well, first, passion. But then the question is, where'd the passion come from? Unbeknownst to me, many years ago in 1976, I fled a very violent marriage. I was living in a foreign country. I had no rights, and I had to literally be smuggled out of the country, along with, at that time, my 12-month-old daughter.
Wow.
So the number of years passed, and I tell people I was in the wrong place, but at the right time in another job, and it wasn't going well for me, and I was fired. And this opportunity came up, and then all of a sudden I'm realizing, look at this. This was me.
Wow.
So I think part of it still comes from that, and the other part comes from there are so many women in the world. We're half the population or more. So what affects them, obviously, organically affects every human being on the face of the earth. And that's where the passion comes from.
Well, and you talk about how many women there are in the world, right? And then we look at gender inequality. That's still present. So
Correct.
I can see. So a lot of times when I hear you speak, and as a male, I can sit there and go, oh my gosh, and the perspective that you can provide. And so that's why I was pretty excited getting you on today, because I think it will hopefully reach some of our listeners who may not understand everything, who may not even know that some of this stuff goes on in our world, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that don't understand. And,
Yes.
and of course, now we are seeing more and more about human trafficking and sex trafficking, and of course, females are a huge part of that in regards to the victim side in that sense. But outside of that, there's just the everyday crime that's going on, and the stuff of abusive marriages, and I think maybe that's or just relationships, I should say. And maybe that's a place where we can start as well too, is helping people. There's so many people out there that say, well, how come that person just doesn't leave that relationship? They're getting hurt. They just need to leave and then they'll be safe, right?
Correct.
So how do you combat that?
Well, there are two things. One is, this is the only crime, legal crime, that we call it, that's been designated as a crime, where people will judge the victim's response to the violence than any other crime, than more than the perpetrator. So instead of asking the question, what's wrong with her? Why does she stay or go back to him? We never ask the question, what is he doing that for? If she gives him a second chance and forgives him and she goes back, why does he continue to do it? But we don't ask that. I kind of compare it when I talk to people to a bank situation. So let's say you're a bank teller. Mm-hmm. And you work at a bank, and one day a robber comes in, a bank robber, and the bank robber looks like they got a gun. They put it up to you. You're the teller, and they say, please, give me all your money. What would you do, Tom?
I'd probably give him my money.
You'd give them your money,
Yeah.
right? Out of fear, correct?
Mm-hmm. I want to
So
live. Yeah.
you
I
want to
give him
live.
money, right? Yeah.
You get, what happens after the bank robber leaves the bank? What do?
Call the police.
Call the police. Police come in, they want a description. You're going to give them a description of the robber. They're going to take off and start looking for that person. And then it may be reported on the 5 o'clock news that night. There was the bank robbery on Olive at the such and such bank, correct?
Yep.
Now we're going to switch. All right, different
Okay.
kind of crime. This is the crime that most people call domestic violence. So you're a woman, you're in this relationship, your partner or your husband is threatening you, maybe didn't put a hand on you at that exact moment, but is threatening you with a bat. And you call the police. And when you call the police, he runs out of the house, right? Police show up. They're going to say what happened. 99% of the time, that police officer, and I'm not blaming them, they're doing what the protocol says to do, will say, we didn't see it happen. It's going to be your word against his. We encourage you to go get an order of protection or file for divorce, those kinds of things. So first of all, there's two different responses to the crime by law enforcement in that situation, right?
Yeah.
So now we're going to take it even a little bit further and still comparing it to that bank robbery. This time, her husband actually kills her or severely beats her. It gets on the news, and they report it as there's been a domestic dispute at such and such address. And we all accept that. None of us think too much of it. If you compare it to that bank robbery crime, right? So nobody would question you, Tom, if you were the teller and you got robbed, if the next day you went back to work.
Yep.
Because you still needed that job and you know that you like the people that are there, etc. Nobody in the community or on the media would say, what's wrong with Tom Duff? He's a bank teller. He knows banks gets robbed. His was robbed, and he went back to work the next day. They're not going to say there's something wrong with you. They're going to say, I understand why that person went back. Also in the media, they're not going to say that they were, instead of calling it a bank robbery, they're not going to say there was a financial dispute at Commerce Bank. Tom had money, the robber wanted it, and they just couldn't come to an agreement.
Very true.
But we will call it a domestic dispute when there's actually physical contact, physical assaults. So there's a whole different response to this, what a lot of people will call intimate partner abuse. We judge the victim differently, we judge the perpetrator differently, and we report on it differently.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest differences why it's still so prevalent in our society, in our own community here in St. Louis.
And then, so some of those factors, right? Why someone won't leave that situation. I mean, you started identifying some of it. You know, It's your
Yes.
house. It's your, where a bank robber doesn't know who you are, right?
Correct.
I mean, he might know your first name or something, who knows, but he doesn't live there. He's not, all of his stuff isn't
That's right.
there, but some of those factors.
So that's the second factor. The first one I talked about is how not only the perpetrator views it, the victim views it, but we as a society view it. The other thing is that we as a society labor under this myth that it is safer for an abused woman to leave that relationship, when in fact, we know from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice that the most dangerous time in an abused woman's life is when she leaves. Her risk of being murdered rises by 70%. So battered women don't die because they stay in that relationship. Battered women die because they made the decision to leave, whether she filed for a divorce, moved out, or got an order of protection. Because at that very moment, her partner sees that as she has broken his power and control over her. And he will do what he has to do to get it back. So as ironic as it may seem, and counterintuitive, the safest place sometimes for an abused woman to be is to stay in that relationship. Now, the other part of that, too, you have to understand is that relationship didn't start out abusive or violent. Initially, there was romance, intimacy, and perhaps love. And so we look at our own families, and once you have that intimate relationship, we're going to give that person a lot more chances to change than we would that bank robber.
Yes.
We're going to say, well, we're going to make excuses. He was having a bad day, or he was drunk, or he was on drugs, or he's jealous, those kinds of things. But we wouldn't make those same excuses for the bank robber. What, the bank robber was poor. He needed the money. He was having a bad day. He was drunk when he robbed the bank. So we're going to forgive him, and we're going to let him come back. So there's a big difference in the dynamics in that relationship as well. So those are the two things. One, how everybody views it and holds it to a different standard of not only respect and violence and criminality, but a different standard because we don't understand the fear that she's living in. It is sometimes the safest place for her to remain.
And I think that's a factor that stands out to me a lot of times because I think the greater public looks at that like, just get away, you'll be safe. Any type of danger, right? You get away from danger, you're safe. If there's a shark in the water, you get out of the water, you don't go back into that beach, right?
Correct.
But this is different, and that's why I think people have to figure out or to accept as well.
And as you said earlier, the bank robber doesn't know everything about you. Her abuser does. Knows where she lives, who the friends are, who the family is, where she works, maybe where she goes to school, her social security number, her cell phone, all of those things. He knows so much about her, and he can use that to coerce her in coming back or even staying.
And for her, she's thinking also, right? Okay, if I leave, how am I going to live, right? Or where am I going to stay? Where am I going to find a place for my kids and myself to be safe? Is the street safer than this apartment with him that's coming in and out? The apartment probably is, right? So, I mean, all those things that people have to weigh out.
People don't understand that. Well, we hear the phrase all the time in the political arena. Freedom isn't free.
I got that tattoo. No,
yeah,
I'm kidding.
I got a tattoo.
I don't.
That's how she lives too. She has to do a risk assessment. How much am I willing to pay for this freedom? Am I willing to remove my kids from school, their playmates? Am I willing not to see my family because if I go to their house, he's just going to show up there and harass them or maybe threaten them? What am I going to do about my income if she's dependent upon him? But even if she has her own money, it can be really difficult. There's a change going on right now in our St. Louis area about child support. So one of the things that's changing is that if you don't pay your child support, it used to be you could be put in jail. Now, the prosecutor in St. Louis County and the prosecutor in St. Louis City have decided that they don't want to go that route. And I think for some, that's good. There's a good reason behind that. But what if you're in this kind of relationship? Money is very powerful, manipulative, and he can use that against her. It's like, I don't have to pay you child support because nothing's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
So now what is she going to do?
Yeah.
I've been in court just recently where I saw a woman who showed up every single month. He still hasn't paid the child support that the court has mandated. Still hasn't paid the child. This is a year. He still hasn't paid it. Now, we can say, well, he doesn't have any money. But I saw him out in front smoking a cigarette.
So there was something there.
So he had something there. You know, he had money for that. He has money for other things. But he knew nothing's going to happen to me if I don't pay child support. So, yeah, she has to risk a whole lot when she makes that decision to leave.
And so for some of these people who abuse, sometimes that external control is really important for them when it comes to criminal justice system or something, because their internal control system, they have those thinking errors, right? Hey, nothing's going to happen to me if I don't do what I'm supposed to, so why
Correct.
do it then? Why choose the right path?
Why choose the right path? So that's the other thing that people in our society don't quite understand. In many of these situations, he can abuse with impunity. Not a whole lot's going to happen. So, for example, let's say she calls the police. There's evidence that he has beaten her. She goes to the hospital, the ER. They've got medical records. She said it was him. She goes to court. She gets an order of protection. She also says, I want to cooperate, and I will testify if he gets charged, right?
Everything you're supposed to do, right?
Everything you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Everything that we in society says, what's wrong with her? Why won't she call the cops? Why won't she do this? So she goes to court. You have to wait, first of all, maybe a year, 2 years, depending on how many continuances her perpetrator may get. And all while that's happening, she's a sitting duck. So now she goes, day comes, she's testifying in court. The jury, again, tends to judge her behavior more than her abusers. He's found not guilty. If you think he was violent towards her before she testified against him, what do you think he's going to do now?
Yeah.
She now has a target on her forehead. So many women in these situations are also very fearful to testify against them. And again, then that means they can still continue to go on. So it's not like he's just going to do it to her. Even if she does get away, the next woman in his life, he's going to do it again. It's a serial kind of thing. It's
Cycles.
not viewed towards her personally. And that's where we come in, where we're trying to get her to understand this really had nothing to do with you. You could have done everything he told you he wanted you to do at every command, and he still would have been abusive towards you.
Because then when you guys get involved, and we can talk about some specifics of the amazing work you guys do and the commitment you and your staff have, it's just amazing and you'll probably share some of that as we go. But I mean, you guys are picking up, just the healing part of it. Before you can get even to helping some of these people find jobs or just housing even, right? You're just in the business of healing and just picking up the pieces.
Yeah, by and large.
Yeah.
We're there for safety. Women are welcome to stay with us for about 3 months. Some women will stay longer, but we're there for that immediate crisis. First and foremost, to get her safe. And then once she and her children are safe, to start that healing process. What is it that you need to help yourself heal? What is it that you need so you don't feel coerced or compelled to go back to that relationship? Now, there are so many wonderful organizations in St. Louis. St. Louis gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons that I don't agree with, but we've got some wonderful social services out there. So we will refer her to them to help her with the housing, the employment, all of those kinds of things. We're there to help her safety plan and to heal and to understand why this happened. Why did he do this? Because that's important, because a lot of these women will blame themselves. I should have done what he said. Yeah, I did push his buttons. I knew I was pushing his buttons. I shouldn't have done that. So I bear some of that guilt and blame. We do that a lot, just as human beings, and you know better than I do. Because that keeps us feeling safe. If we can say to ourselves, I have some blame to this, it also says to her, I have some control in my life, when in fact she really didn't. Doesn't matter what she did or didn't do. She had no control over him. And that's the other myth that we have to work with our women on.
So, 37 years there, right? You see some of those patterns, right? Of
yes.
When women come in and what they're dealing with, that guilt as well. I think, I worked a lot in the past with on the offender side. I worked with a lot of those offenders.
Yes.
And then when I worked on the victim side as well too, it was interesting hearing some of the back and forth of, the cycles of the offenders and what they thought they could get away with, and what they did get away with at times. But then for the women, it was, no, I shouldn't just say women, because it was lots of different
Sure.
individuals.
Can happen to anybody.
Yeah, exactly. But the patterns that they deal with, it's just so common. And it's that power and control from the offender and the stripping their victims of that,
Yes.
and then they have nothing left, and that's where you guys come in on a lot of those.
They don't. And the other thing that we try to help our women with, and let me make it clear, we also serve transgenders, and it's same-sex relationship as well, but we will always refer as women, is to help her understand that initially, unlike other crimes, this crime comes packaged to her initially in these very acceptable, almost complimentary ways. Because as young women, or even if it's a young man, and your parents give you all these skills, they teach you how to be safe. Go out in numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Make sure you have extra money to call a cab or an Uber or whatever. We never teach our young people how to be safe with the person who's most likely to harm you. What do you look for in a potentially abusive relationship? So, for example, when I go out and I talk to young women, I'll ask them, so, what have you been taught to do? Well, you want to look for somebody who's really nice. Really? Mm-hmm. How many times have you seen on TV where some man's gone out and killed his wife, his children, and they interview the neighbors? So what was he like? He was a nice guy.
Nice guy, quiet.
Quiet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's that grooming side of the offender,
yes.
right? Yeah.
So nice doesn't do it. So I always try to get him, what do you mean by nice? Well, polite. Many of your viewers may not remember who Ted Bundy is, but he was a serial killer of women. He was the most polite guy you'd ever want to meet. Mm-hmm. So manners doesn't do it either. Mm-hmm. So they're being taught what to look for in the very wrong way. So the first thing that we tell women to look for, and here's how it can come packaged in this complimentary way. It's called isolation. You start going out with someone, and after a little while, they don't want you hanging out with any of your male friends. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, well, I know what guys are like. I don't want you to be with them. So it comes across as he's very protective. And, oh, my gosh, he must like me so much, right? He must like me.
Yeah, I want to spend time with you.
I want to spend more time with
only you.
And only you. Mm-hmm. Number one red sign is that kind of jealousy, because especially women are taught through media and all kinds of other things, even from your own family members, that jealousy can be a compliment, and it's not. Mm-hmm. Jealousy is a negative emotion, and it connotes ownership. So, for example, today, if I was jealous of that tattoo that you have, that you said you have, it means I want one like it, right?
Yeah.
If I'm jealous of your car, it means I want one like that. Mm-hmm. If I'm jealous of your hair, your figure, it means I want it. Mm-hmm. Jealousy connotes ownership. Mm-hmm. It never connotes love or respect. So that's the first thing we tell them to look for. Mm-hmm. Jealousy. And so she starts giving up her male friends, right? Mm-hmm. And now he says, I don't want you, I'd rather you spend more time with me than your girlfriends. Because whenever you're with them and then you come back, we get in an argument. She's like, well, maybe he's right. So she doesn't hang out with them as much. So here's what I do when I speak to students. And these are usually high school students. When it's an all-girl class, I ask this question. How many of you know of a sister or a classmate or a friend, a cousin, whatever, that when she started going out with Bubba, she stopped hanging out with her female friends? How many of you know that? How many girls do you think raised their hand?
Oh, a bunch.
Probably 75 to 85% of the girls in that class. Now I go to the boys' class. How many of you have a brother or a male classmate here, whatever, that when he started dating Betty Lou Who, he stopped hanging out with you guys? How many boys raise their hands?
Not as much.
Very rarely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Maybe one or two at the most. It's two different realities. Girls are socialized very early on to believe that in order to keep her partner, she has to give up other relationships. Men are not.
Yeah.
Now, if you're an abuser, you already have the fertile ground, because you can now begin to isolate her from other people very easily. Mm-hmm. And you do it under the guise of, I like you so much, I only want you for me. So then you can start seeing how it's easier to have that control. And we all need social support to resist negative behaviors, right?
Yeah.
So if she doesn't have that social support from her female friends, her male friends, now let's say you're older and you're an adult and now you're married or living together and he doesn't like your family. So he might say something like, you know what? Let's just have Thanksgiving, just us, our little immediate family. Your mom and dad never did like me, and she's got to kind of say in her mind, yeah, they don't.
Yeah.
Not thinking they probably have cause.
Yeah.
But so she's like, okay, that doesn't sound so bad on the surface, right, Tom? Let's just have our own tradition and start that. Well, now she's given up family. So her total focus is going to be on what he needs and what he wants. So he's taken away that support. That's your first red flag that you want to look for. But most of the time what we're taught to look for is somebody, with one eyebrow, 10,000 tattoos, and a six-pack.
Creepy looking.
That's not going to be the guy who's going to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so prevention strategies need to be a whole different world.
A whole different world. And, they get bombarded. We all get bombarded with all these other mixed messages anyway out in our society about what is a respectful and equal relationship, right?
Yeah.
We get bombarded with it. So there's so many mixed messages.
Yeah, for confusion. And yeah, this might be switching gears just a minute, but that's the beauty of a podcast. We can just switch back and forth,
That's
right?
right.
So, I know one of the things you guys do, and I think you're still doing it, but maybe in the past too, but going out and talking to, getting like male high school basketball teams, or sports teams, I should say, maybe, on board with just...
Yeah, it was called Timeout. We aren't, unfortunately, doing it right now. We hope to do it again. We lost some money for it. And we're a small staff, and it took a lot of time, so we had to pull out of it. But reaching out to coaches, because coaches are leaders, and they are mentors. And especially for young men, they are a very important person in their life. And so reaching out to them to be role models, to be leaders in ending this kind of violence, and teaching these young men not to be bystanders to it. So if you hear somebody making a misogynistic or horrible remark about women, referring to them as the B or whatever, that we're teaching them, no, to be a real good, strong man, a good man, you speak up. It's not enough that you just don't do it. The famous saying from Martin Luther King, as we've always heard, it's not the words of our enemies, it's the silence of our friends. So men, we don't see this as a woman's problem. We see this as a man's problem, which means men need to take the leadership in ending it. So we reached out to these coaches, and it went very, very well, and they would talk to the boys about it. We had a brief, 12-minute video clip on it with a man speaking about ending this kind of violence and what they can do. And then they would pick a basketball game, and they'd make a public service announcement during the game about ending this kind of violence. And we would come to the game and talk to the team if they would want us to. And it worked really, really well. We think it had some impact on some of the young men, but the coaches liked it. So much so that the girls' team started becoming involved in it as well.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Well, and that's what it's about, right? Getting to people early, prevention, early intervention, and teaching appropriate interactions and relationships and what to look for, what not to look for, right?
Correct.
So, yeah, because you often characterize your agency as a social justice agency, right? So earlier I was going to start this topic, but I'm like, oh, this would be good for the podcast, actually, when we record. It's been a long day. I was listening to the radio the other day, and somebody was talking about what is social justice. There's individual justice, but there's no such thing as social justice. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to say that to Michelle. I'm going to trigger her. So when you say social justice, what do you mean, and how is the agency a social justice mindset?
Well,
because I believe social justice does exist.
I do too. Well, first of all, the word social, we refer to that as communal. It means it's part of the community. The community has to be involved. It is not individualistic. We're part of a community. The community has to end any sort of oppression or marginalization of a particular group of individuals. So in our social justice thing, what we're saying is that we view and see the dignity in every human being, regardless of who they are, to the extent that we will work not only with that human being, there's your individual justice, but the social justice saying we're going to go broader and call the community to action to end this. That's what social justice is. It's making a communal effort to end any sort of oppression, inequality, or marginalization of a particular group of people. So that's what we mean by it. So we can't just provide the service. We actually, it's that old proverb where teach a guy to fish or whatever. We got to go to the beginning of the stream and see where it's all starting from, and then try to get it from there.
So if you're out there listening and you don't think social justice exists, you just heard your definition of it. And it is. I mean, that's what, we're very focused, when we're helping people, right? But then it's like at times I think we lose focus on, man, but look what we're doing for the community. And if you help one person and they have a different mindset, so you think about those sports teams, those coaches get a different mindset, then they reach those players, right?
Yes.
Those players reaches their friends, or they recognize maybe their feeling of jealousy that they're having, and realize, let me check myself, right? I mean, those are all the things that make up the person.
Yes.
In all respect to the individuality of each person and how we can attack some of those core issues on people, and then boom, we make change from a community standpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, the Revolutionary War was a social justice
I wasn't alive
action.
then, but okay.
Yeah, you weren't there.
Yeah.
But you can think about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So there were these individuals who wanted individual justice for themselves. But they realized that is precarious. If I only get it for myself, I'm walking on thin ice. We got to do this as a community. And that's what we mean by social. So what did they do? They all came together and said, look, if each one of us wants our own individual freedom and right to worship the way we want, own land, then we all got to be in this together or it's going to fall apart. That's what social justice is.
Yeah, and look how deep-rooted it is in our country.
It's very deep-rooted in our country.
Yeah.
Very deep-rooted.
So when we talk about, I think a lot of times when you hear about domestic violence or you just hear the concept, I think the greater community puts that into a box, people in poverty.
Yes.
That's people in poverty.
It's not.
Right? Touches everybody. Is that right?
Touches everybody. So, I'm going to refer to my little paperwork here because I'm not great in memory since I already called you the wrong name. But on statistics, it affects everybody. And these aren't statistics coming from St. Martha's Heart. These are statistics that are coming from not only the Department of Justice, United States Department of Justice, the law enforcement community, as well as the United Nations that does global research on it. So globally, what we know for a fact is that 1 out of 3 women will experience this at least once in her lifetime. 1 out of 3. So that could be when she's in high school or college or dating and she's attacked by her boyfriend or pushed or shoved or sexually assaulted. But 1 out of 3 women will experience this. It never says 1 out of 3 poor women, uneducated women, non-Christian women. It's 1 out of 3. As a matter of fact, because of that view, that image that we have of domestic violence happening in poor communities, or as some people would say, the trailer parks, right? It is sometimes much more difficult for a wealthy, well-educated woman, for example, here in the St. Louis area, who lives in Ladue, to be believed. Because nobody wants to believe, even if she goes to court or talks to friends, that her wealthy husband in this gorgeous house is the one who scares her the most.
Because he looks the opposite of what we've trained everyone to look like.
He doesn't have the six-pack Joe look and all of that. So she is going to have more problems getting people to even believe her. So she goes to court and tries to get an order of protection, or she files for divorce. The first thing that she's going to hear from the other side is she's just doing this to get more money out of it.
Yeah, those women are out for money, and that's all.
That's
it's about,
all they
right?
want. And so women on our board that are from incredibly wonderful backgrounds, some of them very famous in St. Louis over the years. These are women who have been married to very violent men. No matter where I go, no matter where I talk, somebody will always come up and say it happened to me, or it happened to my sister, or it's happening to my daughter who's married. Every race, every religion, it will happen to. Now, unfortunately, right now, Missouri ranks 7th in the nation of male partners murdering their female partners. We are 7th in the nation. The highest murder rate for women right now is Alaska, and those are Native women.
Wow.
They have the highest murder rate per capita by their intimate partners. Missouri 7th.
7th.
And it doesn't say. You're 7th for all those poor, uneducated women.
Exactly.
You know, we can start naming how many have been in the media over the years that are well-educated, wealthy women from St. Louis County areas that have been murdered. So that's a myth. But this is still that one crime that we tend to hide. Even the victim wants to hide it because unlike other crimes, again, we go back to you being a bank teller, you're not ashamed or embarrassed that you were robbed at the bank. She is. Because imagine the feeling to have to go before a complete stranger, whether it's a judge or the police or even tell a family member or a friend, this person that I love, and she could still love him because she remembers the good times, is the person I've shared my body with, I've had children with, is the person that I am most afraid of. She carries with her, unlike any other crime out there, a sense of guilt and shame and embarrassment, that she will be judged for being with this person. And she's not wrong. She will be judged for being with him.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Do you... So, for us to say, you know, we want to get rid of this problem needs to, of course, right? We don't want it to ever happen again. But we know reality is...
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. What are things, and, you know, maybe it's from the advocacy level, the criminal justice system, you know, we're there on the social services agencies are there on the back end to help people overcome that. But is there, I mean, what can we do to try to start the prevention of it? Decrease it. How can we decrease it, right?
Correct. Well, I'm a political science major, so I always go to the ballot box. That's number one. You can always be a well-educated voter. Pardon me. The other thing is, you know, learn about it. Get a book. Call a shelter and ask them, where can I learn more about this? What are the signs to look for? Because, again, it's been packaged so acceptable in our community. You know, here's how I'm going to ask you a question. When do you think it became illegal in Missouri for a husband to beat his wife? What year was that?
Oh, no. Well, since you phrased it that way, I'm going to say like 1975.
Close. 1980. Because up until 1980, there was still a law in the books in Missouri that said a husband had the right to physically discipline his wife as long as he didn't cause permanent physical harm.
1980.
1980, the law was finally removed.
Wow.
And permanent physical harm didn't mean a broken leg because you could heal from that. So when do you think it became illegal in Missouri for a wife to beat her husband?
For her to be illegal? It'd be illegal for
when
a
did
wife.
it become illegal for a wife to beat her husband?
1930.
And trick question, always been illegal.
I'm not laughing because of that, but
Exactly.
just you tricked me.
Exactly.
So it's always been illegal for a woman to lay hand on her husband.
She could be prosecuted. Those laws were on the books every 50 states, and it took that long to get rid of them.
Wow.
That long. So there's that residual thing that we talk about when you're doing mental health.
Yeah.
The residual effects, the intergenerational trauma that gets passed on, that's embedded in you. So there's still this sense that when you're in a relationship, that male-female relationship especially, that somebody in that relationship needs to have more power than the other one. And historically and legally, that has been given to that man in that relationship. It's going to take a long time. It won't happen in my lifetime that it's going to end, but eventually I think it's going to, because if we don't have gender equality we will always have violence in the streets. Because let me tell you, what we're seeing going on in the streets starts in the home.
Amen to that.
And
Yeah.
85% to 90%, depending on the research you look at, the person in the home that is being physically assaulted is the woman and or the children. That's the question. The other thing that I don't think we even talk about with all the mass shootings that we have, we also know that between, I think it was 2006 and, 2009, there's my statistic, and 2017, 54% of the mass shootings in our country, and a mass shooting defined by the FBI is a single shooter murdering 3 or more people in a single incident.
So FBI definition.
FBI definition.
3 or more.
3 or
Single
more,
shooter.
single shooter, single incident. 54% of those mass shootings has been a man going after an ex-girlfriend or ex-wife's family or friends or coworkers.
Wow.
What we're also discovering with research, that those numbers are going to get even higher, that the mass shooters in our country, when they're looking at their social media posts, et cetera, there's a lot of hatred against women in those posts. So we can talk about gun control, and I'm all for that, and we can talk about mental health issues, but we also have to talk about that whole issue of mass murders and those men who are doing that, what's going on in their lives, that they have this hatred of women.
Yeah, 54%. So you think about
54%.
those statistics, and when you start peeling back all those layers and where it comes from. So knowing that,
High school shooter down in Florida was taking revenge on a girl who wouldn't go out with him. The man that shot up the church in Texas a year and a half, 2 years ago, shot it up. It was because his ex-wife's family was in there. So we have to start looking at that and really getting serious about changing how we view these relationships and equality with the husband and the wife, the male and the female, and making sure that we are teaching our children at a very early age. And I'm not just saying men. Women have a role in this. We're raising children.
Yes.
How are we teaching them about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and how to deal with these kinds of conflicts? Another thing that I'll ask teenagers, which is kind of telling, and I can ask you. So if you want to make a woman feel bad about herself, what do you call her? What kind of names do we call women? You don't have to use the really dirty ones. You can use the initial.
Like the B.
The B.
Right. That feels weird just saying the B.
The B.
C word.
C.
There's a lot of
Slut, whore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fat, ugly.
Yeah. Attack the way people look.
So when you want to make a woman feel bad about herself, and these are questions I ask women. We attack, first of all, who she looks like physically. You're fat, you're ugly, you're too skinny, and who she is sexually. You're a B, you're a C, you're a whore, you're a slut, you're a skank, those kinds of things. We even allow that word, the B word, to be used on television prime time.
Yep.
Makes no difference. We just say it now. Not realizing that when forensic psychologists and psychiatrists are interviewing serial murderers and stalkers of women, they consistently refer to women as bitches, the B word. Wow. Because why? It dehumanizes them. In my mind, in many ways, it's no different than the N word. You take away her humanity, it is so much easier to harm her. Why? She's just a B. Yeah, I did it. She's just a B. Now you say to these same women, if you want to make a man feel bad about himself, what do you call him? What do you think a lot of these young women or women will say? What do we call men when we want him to feel bad about himself?
Man, I don't know. No one's ever called me a bad name. No, I'm kidding. Jerk.
I always say it's the other F word.
You
call women fat. You call a man that you want to insult him. You call him a
fat pig.
No. FAG.
Oh.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Girls will say all the time. What else do you call them? Call them the B word, don't you?
Yeah.
Call them a douchebag.
Yeah.
You call them a wimp. You call them a sissy. You call them the P word, right? Who are we comparing him to when we want to insult him?
Gay individuals, other women. Yeah, exactly.
We're feminizing them, and we're saying the worst thing that you could be called is a woman.
Wow.
So we play a role in this. And so even as women, we have to change those words. We have to change our vocabulary, our syntax, how we deal with it. And when you tell this to very young women who are like preteens or teens, and I'll say, so if you want to insult your boyfriend or your brother, you compare him to yourself? And it blows their mind. They're like, I never thought about it that way. That's what I'm saying. It is so ingrained and infused in our culture, we're not even aware of it. It's like racism. It's so ingrained and infused in the culture, we're not even aware of it when we're doing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Well, and for me, sometimes when I'm thinking about equity in a lot of different levels, but with race, and we can't get gender right. We can't get
gender right. 50% of the population.
The male-female issues that go on, there's still inequalities in regards to how we pay females, right?
Correct.
The stuff we've talked about today, if we can attack some of those issues just on this level, maybe some of the other stuff will change, but we gotta get this right.
We have to get this right, and men have to step up to the plate. They're the ones that have to say something. So I use my dear husband as an example, right? So being married to me can be a bit of a burden sometimes.
Maybe a challenge.
Maybe a challenge. Maybe a challenge,
maybe not a burden.
right?
Yeah.
Thank you, a challenge. I like that. You rephrased it. So early on in our relationship, we'd be out at a social gathering, and somebody would say to me, oh, Michelle, what do you do? And I say, well, I work at a shelter for battered women. Almost every single time a man would say to me, innocently, well, where are you located? And I would say, well, our location is confidential, and that's for the safety of the women and the staff and volunteers. And the response would be, well, if you don't tell me where you're located, how do I know where to send my wife when I get angry with her?
Oh, my gosh.
Now, everybody standing around would kind of laugh, some genuinely and others nervously, that nervous giggle. So if he was really doing that to her, everybody just gave him permission to continue to do it because we think that's kind of funny.
He got away
even
with it.
if it was nervous. And when I would respond to that and challenge that man on it, I would be referred to as a
B,
right?
Mind your own business.
Mind your own business. You're taking this too seriously. You're emotional. You need to chill. Don't get, Really? I'm talking about humans' lives. I think if I'm going to get upset about something, that might be the thing to get upset about, right?
Yeah.
So I started saying to my husband, look, this isn't my job. He's one of yours.
Yeah.
These are your people.
Yeah.
Talk to your people. They're driving me crazy, right? So I say, talk to them. And so I said, and you will see a different response. And that'll also show you the inequity in the relationship. So sure enough, the next time it happened, he said to this man, so-and-so, that's not funny. You shouldn't talk like that about your wife at all. And the man's response was, you're right, Alan.
Wow.
I said, so you see the difference here, Alan?
Yeah.
Not only was his response different, he didn't bash you like they would me, but he listened.
Yeah. Even probably the tone was different.
The tone was different. So that's the other thing that we're looking for, more men coming into the battered women, what we call the battered women's movement, to become the leaders in it. Because frankly, we're really tired.
Yeah, you guys do a lot, right? Well, and like you said, it's a guy problem.
It's a guy problem.
Or whoever the abuser is, right? It's their problem. It's not the problem of the people that are the victims or the survivors of it.
Correct.
In that sense.
Correct.
Man.
So I think that's where we start.
Yeah.
Just changing our words, other people speaking up, learning more about it, confronting it. I'm not saying you're confronting it in an aggressive, violent manner. Of course not. But you have to challenge that person on the way that they're thinking. And most people will look at you and say, I didn't think about that. You're right. Or that's a different way of realizing it.
Yeah.
How that
Opening our
comes
minds.
across. Opening your mind to it.
And the words we use may be, okay, that's part of vocabulary, or that's the buzzwords now that's in our culture, but it's like actually stopping and slowing down and thinking what those words mean. Whoa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, what they really mean. And we can prove that. I ask anybody who's listening to this, who's a little bit older, think back in your childhood. If you got beat up in the playground or something, you usually healed from it. How many of us still remember what that one person said to us that hurt our feelings?
Mm-hmm.
When they called us a certain name or a word, or said, you're ugly, or you're fat, or you have zits, whatever it might have been at that time.
Yeah, Four Eyes.
Four Eyes.
I remember that kid's name.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah.
See?
Mm-hmm.
Four Eyes, Four Eyes. It wouldn't have hurt you as much if he had taken your glasses off and broken them.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep, exactly.
So when people say, oh, sticking stones will break your bones, or words will never hurt you, that is just nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that was probably a little ditty that was made up by a bully.
Yeah.
So that we wouldn't believe it.
Underneath there's a quote, bully.
Bully.
Yeah.
By bully.
Yeah, exactly.
Words hurt. They're very powerful.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So we've been on here today. So I'm even forgetting I'm doing the podcast right now because that's the lovely conversation that Michelle brings. You
You're
forget
kind.
sometimes when you're enjoying the conversation and being educated on stuff. And I really do hope people, this is one of those podcasts where it's like we got to get this. This is part of the whole picture, right? Of making stuff like this okay to talk about because the worlds, we live in, our work lives in, right? It's raw.
It's very raw.
It's stuff that it can turn your stomach, and that will shock you if you don't, if you don't pay attention to the news or you don't read a newspaper. This stuff is going to shock you, and the things you've seen over your 37 years, and experience, and the people you've helped. I have such an admiration for you, because
you.
I know that world is awful to be in, and we have to bring that to the forefront. And so we've had some great conversation today from Michelle Schiller-Baker. She now knows who I am.
Yes, yes.
No, at least she could have picked a cooler name. We'll see if Meehan actually listened all the way through.
If he's listened, yeah.
At least it's been a cooler name.
She's one of our colleagues, yes.
Yeah. But no, it's been great having you on.
Thank you very much.
And I have a feeling we might have you on again in the future.
Please feel free.
And, a couple of the takeaways today is watch what we say, just in general, right? But two, open our eyes up to some stuff. Look at politics. Look at who you're voting for. Look at the laws. 1980 is when it first became illegal in Missouri to seriously hurt. Up until then, you could kind of hurt somebody.
You could physically discipline her, yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But yeah, so just key takeaways, and hopefully we'll be able to decrease that over time with the hopes of extinguishing it at some point. But it's all about breaking down some of those barriers and building some equality for everybody.
It's all about hope.
Yeah, all about hope. What a great way to end. Yeah. Michelle Schiller-Baker, thank you for being on with us today. And this has been Mental Health Matters. And once again, this is Tom Duff, St. Louis Counseling. Check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. Until next time.
This has been Mental Health Matters with Tom Duff of St. Louis Counseling Services. Check out stlouiscounseling.org for more information.